Gothic 1 and 2 are some of my favorite games of all time. The immersive atmosphere, the engaging combat, world building, comfy music, as well as the, great voice acting.
No more Templars or gurus! Only me alone! Die!
To me, these two games had it all that I found myself coming back to it to re-experience and re-engage with the world of Gothic. And the mark of a good game, to me, is the one you tend to come back to every now and again. While as great as Gothic 1 and 2 is, Piranha Bytes stumbled a fair bit with their third entry. After the conclusion of Gothic 2, the nameless hero and his crew found themselves on the mainland, and the game itself was much bigger in scope. Very big. In fact, probably too big. And with a big game comes big problems. I didn't get to talk about Gothic 3 on Gallery yet, so I'll hold back my opinions for now, but needless to say, Gothic 3 disappointed a lot of fans at the time. But 3 years later, enter Risen, released in 2009 by Piranha Bytes, of course, rest in peace, along with their new publisher, Deep Silver. If you played any of these games, I'm sure we know by now that Piranha Bytes went defunct back in June 2024 thanks to Embracer Group. The same year and month where I was in the midst of a Gothic 3 Let's Play, but that's probably just a coincidence. To talk a bit about my experience with Risen 1, I bought the game back during its release date. In fact, I still have my physical copy. No big box unfortunately, this was during a time where big box PC games were pretty much going away or gone entirely. So instead, we got the usual DVD case that you would see in PS2 games and the like. Not even sure the DVD still works, but it probably does because I never finished this game. The farthest I got was to the first town and I pretty much stopped playing. Not because the game sucks or anything like that, likely I just had other games to play at the time or was just too busy. Fast forward 17 years later, I finished the game for the very first time as a Let's Play series, which gives me a good opportunity to plug my Let's Play and streaming channel to say, hey, if you have a lot of time on your hands, want something on your second monitor or something like that, I'll put the link to the playlist in the description and maybe the comments section. But other than that, this video is going to be my personal thoughts and opinions on a game that I neglected up to this point. And the short of it is that I really like Risen. And if you're a Piranha Bytes fan and you haven't played Risen yet, you really should. If you have, well, here's my thoughts on it. To start with, I'll bring up the scale. I feel like Piranha Bytes played it safe and went right back to the roots. Risen was their fourth developed game, and Gothic 3 was pretty much a failure on their end. Instead of a large open world in the likes of Gothic 3, the scale of Risen is similar to Gothic 1 and 2. You can really tell Piranha Bytes learned their lesson with their previous game, as well as moving past their janky nature that their games are known for. The combat is improved, at least when you compare it to Gothic 3. The music is excellent, thanks to Kai Rosenkranz's return to compose the score for Risen, and the graphics got a good upgrade. For the time. Remember those mitts for hands in Gothic 1 and 2? Look, NPCs have fingers now. Before I continue onwards though, I should really talk about the surprise patch that released back in 2023. Risen got bug fix updates as well as making use of 64-bit and the like, as well as controller support. That's why you're seeing a controller-based UI in my gameplay footage. Despite the surprise patch, the game is unfortunately still a little buggy, namely with the UI like this screen right here, where the journal title is right outside of the border. The volume is also notably quiet, very quiet. You need to update the config user.xml file and add or replace the master volume to 765. The file can be found in your app data folder under C drive, to users, your username, app data folder, your local folder, and your Risen folder. The game also registers double presses, which is apparently a game issue from what I read, most notably in the inventory and loot screens. Good thing too, because I thought my controller was broken. There's also weird, intermittent item descriptions on my screen that shouldn't be there whenever I open my inventory or loot a dead body. I've also read cases of missing NPCs, which thankfully didn't happen to me, on top of a really annoying bug if you're playing on a mouse and keyboard, which I should definitely bring up. If you try to play with mouse and keyboard with this patch, and you learn pairing with whatever weapon you're using, there's a really nasty, a very annoying bug that makes it nearly impossible to fight enemies. Anytime you let go of the right mouse button, which is the block button, the castaway will automatically parry, leaving you open to attack. You can get over it by holding it down for 2 seconds or longer, but in the midst of combat when you're trying to focus on not getting hit, blocking, and dodging, that makes it a pretty glaring annoyance. Imagine trying to play the entire game like this. With a controller, you won't run into this issue, because the parry button is set to the Y button. The public beta branch of the patch fixes this problem entirely, but introduces camera issues with the field of view or something like that. So pick your poison. Camera issues or the pairing bug. It's too bad because this game is best played with mouse and keyboard when it comes to combat. It's easier to fight enemies and dodge and disengage and all that. With the controller, it's a little awkward, but still playable. Probably explains why I died more often than usual, which brings me to another point. This game is difficult. Probably more difficult than Gothic I and II. I just kept dying and dying and dying and dying and dying and dying over and over and over again. For your first playthrough, you just have no idea how to progress your character in order to face challenges in this game. While the stats and skills are straightforward, it's more like when you'll need it, how to progress, and what you'll need at certain points. I'll get into all that later, so let me bring up the character sheet. I've always appreciated how simple Piranha Bytes crafted their character stats and skills setup. The castaway has stats in strength, dexterity, and wisdom. You also have your usual hit points, mana, and learning points. You get 10 learning points per level to distribute into stats and skills through the use of trainers. Each trainer has their own specialty, so a fighter would teach you fighting skills in whatever their area expertise is, and a mage or brewer or alchemist would teach you alchemy. I also appreciate when you learn a skill through a trainer, they train you in in-game dialogue instead of the game saying you gain +1 of whatever. For skills, you have combat, crafting, rune magic, thievery, and crystal magic. For combat, you can learn sword fighting, axe fighting, staff combat, archery, and crossbow. For crafting, you got alchemy, smithing, prospecting, and gut animals. Rune magic for seals and create scrolls. Thievery has open locks, pickpocket, acrobatics, and sneak. And lastly, crystal magic has magic bullet, fireball, and frost. For stats, you can increase strength and dexterity by 1 or by 5 learning points respectively. Strength increases the amount of damage you do in melee, and dexterity with ranged. You can also increase your mana through the use of learning points by +1 or +5. Combat and crystal magic cost 10 learning points per dot. Crafting and thievery cost 5 learning points per dot. Rune magic itself is a little interesting. It apparently only costs wisdom. And wisdom cannot be increased through learning points. You earn wisdom through reading books and acquiring stone tablets throughout the world. I also appreciate how Piranha Bytes called the casting stat Wisdom. Most games default to Intelligence for spellcasting, which makes sense if it's a D&D game set in the Forgotten Realms or something like that, where spellcasting requires you to memorize spells and learn ancient incantations. The higher level the spell, the more powerful it is if you succeed in casting it, or dangerous if you cast it wrong, but here, Wisdom. The point I'm trying to make is that I like it when story developers try to find the best name to relate to their spellcasting system. A lot of games just default to Intelligence for magic in general. Other than rune magic though, create spell scrolls cost only 5 learning points. Out of these to keep in mind, despite them being pretty self-explanatory, acrobatics just reduces your fall damage, and in true PB fashion some of these skills are locked out entirely, depending on which faction you join. Also, it goes without saying probably that it costs gold to increase your stats and skills. and it increases in increments the higher your stats or skills get. If you've never played this game before or just didn't know, I'd skip out on Pickpocket, Acrobatics, and Sneak. For the last two, you get an item which negates the need of these two skills entirely. For Pickpocket, it really isn't helpful at all. Unless you really want to roleplay your castaway as a sneak thief, pretty much every quest has an alternative way of completion. Listening to the castaway's pickpocket dialogue is pretty amusing though, where he distracts his mark enough to pickpocket an item right out of their inventory.
You can do calculations. I earned 219 gold coins, but I need to split it between 3 people.
Let me see. That would be 73 each. If it's 219 divided by 3, that's 73. Yes, 73.
You know your stuff. Do you know any good jokes?
You think now's the time for jokes? Maybe. Most people could do with cheering up. You hear the one about the Geiger and the Treasure Seeker?
Yeah, sorry. I've heard that one. Hey, do you know any good jokes?
Oh man, I know the best. 3 whores are down at the harbour. A blonde, a brunette, and a redhead. The blonde says to the brunette,
I know that one.
I get a kick how you can snatch weapon right out of an NPC's hands. Other tips include combat. Sword is very good. You don't need more than 7 dots in sword. This gives you a charge attack, which changes the dynamics of combat a bit. Axe is good, only once you reach level 6. This enables you to carry an axe one-handed so you can use a shield. Staff is apparently terrible. It does less damage and is much slower than a one-handed weapon. And when it comes to combat and Risen, you're definitely going to want to carry a shield unless you want a challenge. For crossbow and bow, apparently these skills are useless until dot 6 or higher. They just increase your reload and drawing speed. Each skill point in combat gives you a new move, parrying, lateral blows, combining more blows, the ability to carry a bastard sword, or even a two-handed sword in one hand so you can use a shield, and so on and so forth. Combat itself feels mostly better to me compared to Gothic I and II, though it can be very frustrating for playing a pure fighter character like I did. I'll get to that point later. Another tip, learn alchemy and maybe smithing. Alchemy will let you craft permanent stat potions. Trainers will only cap you at 100. To go past that to the max of 200, you have to use potions. You can also eat apples or eggs to gain up to 5 strength points. This requires 10 apples or eggs for every 1 point. There's also some other food items you can make as well that'll increase your strength and stuff, as well as give you experience. Smithing I found to be handy as well. While you'll eventually move past the crafted swords you get from smithing, the rings and amulets can be helpful. If you're playing with swords, you do get a certain sword only through smithing that will help you out in the 2nd and 3rd chapter by a lot. The best rings and amulets you get only through smithing. I like crafting games, so I tend to learn these kinds of skills anyways as long as it's not super complicated, and I don't have to grind hours for materials like in an MMO or something. Next, the combat. It's fun. Mostly. The problem is when you're fighting wolves, boars, and basically any wildlife creature. I don't know what it is with Piranha Bytes with wolves and boars being their most annoying enemies, but holy deuce are they annoying here. Not nearly as annoying as in Gothic 3, at least when that game first released, but still pretty annoying. Problem with these creatures is that they attack fast and unpredictable at times, which is why a shield is outright necessary. Why, you may be thinking? Because not every single wildlife creature can be blocked without a shield. My experience with this game is different compared to a mouse and keyboard user, but considering the pairing bug, I had no choice but to use the controller, which made it much more awkward than intended. And normally, and this makes sense unfortunately, wolves tend to travel in packs, so there were quite a few instances with enemies where I had to run away and break 1 or 2 enemies away from their pack so I'm not overwhelmed. And some of the enemies don't make any sense, like look at this rotworm here. Looks slow and sluggish, right? Well, how the hell are they able to dodge backwards like this? It's a worm, by the holy flame. And this is another problem, at least with rotworms and sea vultures. I expect sea vultures to annoyingly dodge backwards, but not worms. So get used to using the environment to your advantage here. Get the enemies back towards a wall or cliff or something like that and just block, then punish. If you're really annoyed by the wildlife like I am, I really recommend learning Create Scrolls even as a fighting character. You get a scroll called Conjure Skeleton, which summons quite possibly one of the most helpful companions in any video game, Fred, the skeleton. An ancient warrior according to the scroll at least. Aside from the silly name, Fred is overwhelmingly helpful. He is pretty good at drawing the enemy's attention so you can flank them. He doesn't complain, get in your way, and he's surprisingly durable. He really only starts lagging behind when it comes to the game's later enemies, but he becomes a boon companion once you're able to summon him consistently. Because of him, I was able to take out ogres a bit earlier than I feel I should have, and the best thing about him is that once he's summoned. Unless he falls in combat or you teleport away, he will stay by your side to the very end, and he can also be healed through the use of magical healing scrolls. I also like to believe that Fred isn't really his real name. The castaway just calls him that. Other than all that stuff about wildlife, fighting NPCs is fine. In fact, it's pretty fun and engaging. A huge step up from Gothic 3 and more like Gothic 1 and 2. There's more of an element to combat, especially once you earn charge attack. Things like charging your third blow to break through a shield user, making them stagger, then delivering the final blow which does the most damage in your combo. They can also parry the castaway and have their own combos based on their own weapon skill and stats, making the game feel more immersive. Other elements, such as using your environment like a doorway to focus on one enemy at a time, adds an element of strategy rather than absent-mindedly pressing the attack button, and occasionally the dodge button like in some games. Piranha Bytes back then was pretty good at making you engage with the world around you. Stuff like this is just missing in modern games. And while I'm more than aware of the fact that you can break the gameplay in Gothic 1 and 2 with creature scrolls, on your first playthrough, you're not likely to take advantage of that, and no one but yourself is forcing you to play that way. But other than all that, I found the combat in Risen to be satisfying in the end. Next thing I want to talk about is the character progression. I talked about how in Gothic 1 and 2 that those games have a satisfying sense of character progression. Your hero always starts off pretty weak, and that's an understatement. Like look here, the castaway starts at level 0, not even level 1, level 0. I believe it was the same in Gothic 1, right? Where the nameless hero was level 0, much like the castaway. Imagine being so terrible at everything that you're level 0. At his age, too. It's not like he's a child or a teenager here. On a serious note, I believe that Piranha Bytes excelled in their games not only in world design and immersion, but having a satisfying character progression system. You start off absolutely weak, you can barely wield a weapon, and you slowly become more capable and stronger from mid to late game, becoming an absolute powerhouse towards the game's conclusion. Now that's satisfying. I've also appreciated, at least in Gothic 1 and 2, how the hero swung his sword. Like, he's trying his best here, but he just doesn't have any training. Then, when he becomes a bit more proficient, he's wielding it like a trained fighter, then like a sword master towards the end of the game. That element is still here in Risen. Kind of. The castaway's animation gets more professional the more he learns about combat, though his beginning idle stance still looks kind of okay. I mean, look at how the nameless hero carried his in Gothic 1. Small animated details like this adds to the immersive nature of these kind of games. And you can also totally wreck the combat system in Risen if you know what you're doing, or if you've played Gothic 2 before. Things like pushing your strength past 100 through the use of permanent strength potions, making you an absolute melee machine the last couple of chapters. Oh, story time. I had a whole thing typed up about the world building, immersion, atmosphere, and music here, but I feel it's better to talk about the story of Risen. Which is also a good time to mention that there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this video. I'll try to remember to put a warning at the beginning. But pretty much from here on out, there will be spoilers, so... Risen, of course, tells an entirely new story, and is set in an entirely new world separate from the Gothic games. Risen is set on some planet. Doesn't have a name, I don't think. But basically, humanity has driven the gods from their planet permanently so they can be masters of their own fate. Which sounds great. except it had the nasty side effect of releasing these ancient beings called Titans, and, once released, they started destroying everything around them. And ancient ruins have risen from the ground, with monsters pouring out of them to do their monster things like killing people and marking their territory wherever they go. Sounds like a great plot for a video game, huh? The opening narrates all this with a castaway and a woman stowed away on a small ship, and some tough, monkish looking guy with an ocular fighting one of these titans called the Water Titan. He fires some beam magic thingy at it, it does nothing, he gets mad, then he teleports away. Then the Water Titan destroys the ship, and the game starts with the castaway waking up on a beach. Nearby, he finds the woman he was with named Sarah, and wakes her up. Turns out they're the only survivors of the shipwreck, but now they're alone, unarmed, no gold, no food, no shoes. At least for the castaway. Except in my case, it took me reaching the first town before I managed to get a pair of shoes with my armor, which was like 6 hours into the game or something like that. All because I was too cheap to pay 500 gold to a pessimistic worker in a bandit camp. I'm digressing, but let's pause here and go back to the gameplay. Like I said in the beginning, I didn't talk about Gothic 3 on here, but if you played that game, remember how the game starts off, right? Where the game puts you right into combat with not 1, not 2, not 3, but about a score of orcs, before the game even lets you get used to the controls and gameplay, on top of putting a tutorial notifications to read while everything is going to hell around you? Well, it seems like Piranha Bytes may have learned their lesson here. I want to say that, but I remember in a video a long time ago they did away with that when it came to Risen 3, so who knows what the hell they're thinking. But in Risen 1, the tutorial here doesn't really interfere with your gameplay. I mean, sure, you get tutorial pop-up notifications, but you could totally turn that off and be fine, and they're not very invasive. After the castaway wakes up Sarah, they pick up where the ship, Titan, and the storm took off. They talk for a very brief moment, then Sarah urges the castaway to find a weapon, and search around the beach for anything they could use, while she serves as a lookout. Honestly, this is really how a tutorial should be. The game gets you used to the controls at your own pace, you can walk around, maybe you're hoping someone else survived the shipwreck while you take what you need from the dead sailors' bodies. Finding a weapon is easy enough. Maybe you take a few practice swings to get further used to the controls. It's all done very well. If you comb the entire beach like I did, you'll find about 15 gold coins. Mussels which, if you take the time to read the description, may or may not come with a pearl. You'll find 2 pearls out of about 7 mussels or so. You'll also find other strewn about items that washed in from the wreckage. It's not much, but it's something to get your adventure started. Then you come across your very first enemy, a hungry sea vulture. Unless you're Dark Side Phil or someone else, you'll probably be able to kill it very easily. If you haven't played any of Piranha Bytes games up to this point, there's a harmony to your weapon combos. You need to press the attack button at the right moment to keep your combo going. If you're too slow or too fast, there's going to be an obvious delay between each attack. It's pretty easy to get used to, but may take a bit of practice in the heat of combat, especially when you're fighting multiple enemies. When you're done scavenging the beach, like a desperate cur like me, you talk to Sarah again, and now it's time to move further into the island. I really like how, for your first playthrough, you just don't know what to expect. You really feel like a stranger here. What is this island? What mysteries will you uncover? What kind of people will you meet? What kind of monsters will you face? Kai Rosenkranz's track here really enhances this for you. For this portion, however, you're kinda sort of railroaded until you come across an abandoned house, fighting only a few creatures along the way, some sting rats and wolves. Easy ones, to get you used to the controls and all that still. Sarah in the meanwhile will urge the castaway to pick up healing herbs and the like. If you happen to come across a cave nearby on your way to the house, Sarah will say she has a weird feeling, and urges the castaway to turn back. This footage was on a replay because I missed this cave when I first played, and I was used to fighting these gnomes here already, but on your first playthrough, there's a possibility that you'll die, so ignore her warning at your own peril. When you arrive to the abandoned house, Sarah urges the castaway to search it, to which he finds a key, which opens a chest, which has a frying pan and some other assorted items. Through an in-game explanation from Sarah, the player learns how the cooking mechanic works, Then she pretty much stays here while you get to explore more of the area. Moving past Sarah up cliff dirt roads, the castaway encounters his very first ruin that has risen from the ground since the Titans got released. The player can choose to fight the monsters surrounding it, loot a grave, if the player doesn't mind a little grave robbing, and enter the ruins. A torch is needed as it's very dark. Inside is a grave moth enemy below a trap door. One of many traps that will show up in future dungeons. Other than that, some minor treasure here, really. Considering the castaway is still poorly equipped, exploring this ruin in hopes of finding some helpful equipment is very tempting. And it's pretty much an intro dungeon during this tutorial section, so there's nothing here that will kill you other than the grave moth, and the grave moth surrounding the ruins. Further into the island, the castaway comes across yet another home, abandoned, and you would probably think back when you played this game is, what happened here? Where is everyone? When I was recording for my Let's Play, I had an easy suspicion that this home is not abandoned like the previous one. And honestly, you could totally avoid this home, I believe, and journey north or east of it. Especially since at this point of the game we have absolutely nothing and are pretty desperate for equipment. I've always liked how in games like this, when you start with very little equipment and items, it kinda makes you desperate to steal and take what you want in order to get ahead. But the game is testing you or something like that. I mean, look at the castaway. Look at what he's wearing. He looks absolutely hopeless. Even Sarah's better dressed than he is. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but the game really plays on your insecurities a little bit. Later on, you're asked to deliver beer for a farmer named Robar. You have to deliver 10 beers into camp, but you ask the castaway to get 50 gold coins from Rachel. When you get to Rachel, you have the option of asking for 50 coins more than what Robar asked for. Then, when you get back to Robar to complete the quest, you can give him 50 gold, or just say Rachel didn't pay you. Gold itself becomes a non-issue later in the game, but early on, especially for your first playthrough, you're actually hurting a fair bit. It doesn't help that the first piece of armor costs 500 gold either. You also can't pickpocket it right out of the guy's inventory. Seriously, I can snatch a staff from a warrior monk right out of his hands, but not a piece of armor? Anyways, before I explain what happens in this home, I actually managed to find some better clothes for him, the castaway, a bit earlier than the first town. It was in a farmer's house, in a chest, and yes, I stole it. I was playing a thief fighter character after all, or at least that's my intention for my first playthrough. As good as the clothes are, they didn't come with shoes, which made me sigh internally. At this point I've been playing for like 2, 3, or 4 hours. Stepping inside though, the castaway comes across a hunter named Jan. No, not that Jan, that's Jan Jansen, or Jan Jansen. Jan is suspicious and isn't sure of the castaway's motives, and it takes a few dialogue options to calm him down. The castaway eventually does, and Jan mentions he works for a man named Don Esteban, who was pushed out of a town nearby called Harbor Town by warriors of the Order, known as the Inquisition. That guy back in the intro that fought the Water Titan? That was an Inquisition monk. Jan fills the castaway a bit on what's been going on this island, and recommends he visit Don's camp in the swamps up north. Or, if the castaway wants, he can lead him to the farm nearby where some mage novices live, and go off to Harbor Town from there, the main town of the game. The only town of the game. It's a good time now to bring up the factions. Piranha Bytes is all about the faction system, of course. Gothic I had the old camp, new camp mercenaries, and the religious swamp camp. Gothic II had Lee's mercenaries, Carinas had their militia, and the monastery had fire mages. Mercenaries could become dragon hunters, militia men could become paladins, and novice mages could become a magician of fire. In Risen, the castaway can join the Dawn's gang, the Inquisition, or the mages. Join the Dawn makes you a fighter, hunter, and or rogue. The Inquisition monks fight with staves and use crystal magic, and the mages use runic magic on top of crystal magic, while also having basic training in staves. Despite that though, you're not locked into using staff weapons for the Inquisition or the mages, so you do have options here. I joined the Dawn for my first playthrough and became a fighter rogue character with sneaking and pickpocket. The way you join the Inquisition is interesting. Jan tells the castaway not to get caught by the white robes, which is their slang for the warrior monks. If you do, they'll forcibly conscript you into the Inquisition, because wandering outside of town is illegal ever since they took over Harbor Town. you really have to try to get caught by them, even if this is your first playthrough. Usually, you want to do quests in the Dawn's camp, then quests in Harbor Town. Once you get to Harbor Town, you can choose to ally with the Inquisition or the Dawn, depending on what decisions you make for specific quests there. To speed this up a little, because I don't want to explain each plot point in excruciating detail, because admittedly, this game doesn't have a 10 out of 10 story or anything. Piranha Bytes have always been good in its world building and immersive atmosphere more than storytelling, and to me, a good story is just a bonus. The gist at this point is that the Inquisition took over Harbor Town and drove Don Esteban out of his home. The Dawn ended up taking refuge in the swamps amongst one of the ruins that has risen from the ground. The Dawn basically wants his town back. He also wants to know what Inquisitor Mendoza, the guy back at the ship, wants on this island. The Dawn's crew is your usual rough and tumble fighters and rogues and hunters, and they're not at all nice to the castaway, which is going to be a recurring theme in this game.
I don't like faces I don't know well, and your face is too pretty. Slap some makeup on you and you could work the brothels.
You look tired.
And you look ugly. Piss off.
I'm just making conversation.
And I'm just telling you to piss off.
Get you in trouble. That showed a degree of talent. Not bad.
If you think the monks would be nicer, think again. Well, actually they're a little better, but it makes sense because a lot of the monks are conscripted into service and aren't there of their own free will. A few are, but not all. You find out on the Inquisition side of things that conscripts are basically fodder to go explore the ruins, and most of them end up dead in the end. There are no clear bad or good guys here, really. I can't speak for much of what goes on the Inquisition path yet, since at the time of writing this script I'm only 10 hours into a second playthrough. By the time I'm done writing this, I'll likely still be playing and editing. Good time to mention that I normally don't play a game twice in a row, so usually that means the game is good or interesting enough to do another playthrough, especially a game with multiple factions. Once the castaway gets used to the Dawn's camp, the Dawn sends him to Harbor Town to find his missing men, and help them out in gaining influence in the town. You have to bribe the guard at the rear guard in order to get in. Why did I write it like that? You have to bribe the guard at the rear gate in order to get in. Harbor Town is pretty much the only town in the game. You got this place, the Dawn Swamp Camp, the monastery, and only a few NPCs scattered about the island. It's funny, Harbor Town is a lot smaller from what I remembered of it. When I was playing Risen for the Let's Play, I felt the island itself was, pretty bare? Lifeless in a way? I mean, it makes sense. The world is currently being slowly destroyed by ruins risen from the ground, with civilization destroying titans wrecking everything in their path. Plus, Harbor Town is locked down by the Inquisition, so no one can get in or out. At this point of the game, the castaway is still guildless. You can choose to help the Dawn's men here or help the Order, and it's pretty easy to tell which option will close off support for either faction, so you can't really mess up here. I also can't say for sure, but you may still be able to join the Inquisition Order if you do quests for the Dawn here in town. I will say though that in order to be a mage, from what I read and briefly experienced in my second playthrough, you need to come to Harbor Town first. You need a recommendation letter from the Commandant here to be accepted into the mages up at the monastery. If you get conscripted, no mage for you. Whichever faction you choose, Chapter 2 will start. There are 4 total chapters in the game, and the last 2 chapters are kind of the weakest, but I'll get to that later. If you join the Dawn, he sends you as an emissary to meet with Inquisitor Mendoza. Mendoza wants 5 crystal discs in order to open up a strange door into the volcano, so it's basically a treasure hunt, which is kind of a theme in this game. I should also mention actually that Chapter 2 starts after talking to Mendoza. Bit of an error there, but for the crystal discs, this won't be the first time you have to find several things in order to progress to find more things. Mendoza fills the castaway in on the Titans and how he wants to find any means necessary to stop them. So he's actually a good guy, but in the extreme sense. I'll get to that later. There really is no good or bad guy in Risen. Even the Dawn is self-serving and pretty greedy if the gold behind him back at camp wasn't a clue. When the castaway arrives, the Dawn doesn't really do anything while the castaway cleans up all his mess and the inner turmoil going on in the camp. Back to the crystal discs though, I said there are 5. You find one with the Dawn, one at a recently uncovered ruin that he sends you to, another one from a buried treasure quest, one that should be with Severin at the farm near the monastery, and Mendoza gives you one disc that needs to be repaired by a druid named Eldrick. The one that should have been with Severin was stolen by gnomes led by a mythical creature known as the Geiger, and they're holed up in some abandoned castle up in the northeast. Eldrick unfortunately has disappeared, and this is where the game really picked up even further for me, finding clues as to what happened to him around the area, such as finding his stuff. I wrote stuff, guys. Staff. Finding his staff, and using a nearby hunter woman's big doggo to sniff for his scent, leads you to a rather involved ruin. Cyrus, a mage who is tasked with meeting Eldrick, joins you on this little adventure. You have to talk to Cyrus because he's the only one who gives you a scroll to destroy the magical barrier leading you into said ruin. And this part of the game introduces you to a new enemy called the Saurians, also known as Lizardmen. I guess kinda like the orcs in Gothic I and II, though no cool friendly lizard dude saying his version of Ulu Mulu.
Ulu Mulu.
Ulu Mulu?
Ulu Mulu.
You really need to have trained and leveled up before this point because Saurians are fairly tough, and there are different ranks of them, even undead versions of them, which I think you really see in games. The only other game or series I can think of is the Elder Scrolls with the Argonians, and even then they're pretty resistant to diseases, vampire diseases or not. You come to find out that the Saurians are servants of the Titans and used to rule the world a very long time ago. This particular ruin is called the Lizard Prison, and apparently the Saurians don't really like Eldrick that much. So much that he has his own cell here near the High Priest instead of at the general population area. You'll just find an ogre named Drak who was imprisoned by the lizard guys. Rescuing Eldrick gives the castaway his thanks, so long as you tell Cyrus to F off because Eldrick doesn't like mages. And I almost forgot to mention, as cool as it is to have a temporary companion with you, Cyrus doesn't really react to anything inside the lizard prison. And he really should. Finding out about an ancient race should be a really big deal. It's a turning point in the story as well, but Cyrus just gives off funny battle cries like, "Yes, good stuff!"
Yes, good stuff.
Going back to the Saurians, as cool as their design is, I just noticed that they don't really have a huge presence in the story. I say just noticed because going back and forth between my Risen footage and Gothic footage that there are clear differences between the orcs and the Saurians. And I don't just mean their designs and all that. In Gothic, the orcs have a clear culture despite the hero having very little one-on-one communication with them. Other than Urshak, of course. Urshak talks to the nameless hero about how he broke away from his tribe because they are unknowingly following a demon named Krushak, also known as the Sleeper. The orcs themselves have a huge beef with the humans to the point of going to war with them. But with the Saurians, all you're told is that they once ruled the world and they worship the Titans. Other than their furniture and stone beds, some flags here and there in their fortress, you don't get that same feeling of them being a long-standing enemy like with the orcs in Gothic I and II. I'm leaving out Gothic 3 because of how much of a divergence the orcs were in that game. But with the Saurians, they're basically just fodder that you slay by the hundreds by the time the game is over. For such a huge turning point in the story of discovering a race that once ruled the world, it was a little off to me. Like the story devs just needed some kind of enemy race for the castaway to fight in order to fill out the last couple of chapters with all these ruins and stuff. Like one of them said, let's just make lizard guys but make them like the orcs or something. But with none of that cool stuff like Urshak and more lore on them. The game is really missing friendly or maybe non-friendly Saurians talking to the castaway about how they're going to retake the world for the Titans or something. But to me, they're basically just fodder to wade through from here on out. Like I said, cool design but lacking in lore. Once Cyrus leaves, Eldrick is more than happy to restore your crystal disc once you head back to his hut. He also appreciates the castaway giving him his druid staff back. Before I continue on to my next point, I have to talk about another important character named Patty, the castaway's love interest. I'm bringing her up because she seems to be a recurring character in the Risen series. The castaway meets her in a harbor town, and she's seeking two things. 1, to leave, and 2, find information on her father, Gregorius Steelbeard. I would think a literal steel beard would not be very comfortable. The castaway finds out quickly that Gregorius is actually a pirate, and not a sailor. He's got a well-hidden treasure cache on this island that another pirate, a real cutthroat by the name of Romanov, is also searching for. And this point of the game is also the high point for me, at least at its conclusion. Once you help Patty leave the town, she gives you the burial sites where her father hid clues to his treasure later on. Basically, each treasure chest, 5 of them, give you a clue as to which chest is the correct one in the final area. Unfortunately, Romanov kidnapped Patty long before the castaway found all the notes, and forces the castaway to find the right treasure chest. If he gives Romanov what he wants, he'll give Patty back. But for me, I didn't do that. I ended up killing him and his jerk-faced crew that followed me all around the island while I was trying to find this crap. The treasure Patty was looking for is basically a map Steelbeard made that shows every country and island he visited, as well as the gold he hid in every single one of them. The chest also contained a golden disc as well, which is cool, because we're going to need that. Before moving on to Chapter 3 though, I like how Steelbeard hid his clues around the island. Basically, each note tells you about the men who mutinied against Steelbeard, and it gives you a name for each grave. Would Steelbeard share his treasure with someone who mutinied? Probably not. So the clue in the final area is the name that isn't mentioned at all in any of the notes you find. If you open the wrong chest, you die.
Good riddance.
Much like one of Romanov's henchmen. Love how Romanov is such a jerk that he sends one of his men to die. Surprised he didn't do that with his other men until they found the right chest, but he did need them to follow the castaway around the island, so lucky them. Once the castaway scours the island for all the crystal discs, Chapter 3 will start upon returning to Mendoza. And Chapter 3, as well as Chapter 4, is where the game takes a dive a fair bit. The most interesting thing about Chapter 3 is that it's not just you and Mendoza breaching the Volcano Temple. He brings a whole crew of his Inquisition warriors along with him. So, that means a lot of fighting, and dungeon crawling, as well as Inquisition warriors stealing your experience if they happen to land the killing blow, which is a little annoying. And there's a lot of them here. The castaway also finds information about the Saurians, as well as a Titan Lord named Ursagor in this dungeon. Chapter 3 is very short. It took me around 3 hours or so. It concludes with Mendoza wanting to free the Fire Titan in order to stop another Titan from destroying the mainland. How does he know this? Well, prior to this point, the castaway encountered the spectral form of Ursagor himself, the Titan Lord. Ursagor asked the castaway for his freedom because he is bound to this place. In return, you give the castaway information as to how to stop the Titans. Long story short on that end, because I'm lazy, Ursagor basically says the best weapon against a Titan is another Titan. And the Titan on this particular island is the Fire Titan. And he's the reason why this island is protected from the ravages of the storms surrounding it. Even Sarah mentions something like that in the beginning of the game, that the storms are happening around the island, like it's being shielded or something. Not like the Fire Titan is protecting the people of this island or anything like that. More like his mere presence is a ward against his fellow Titans. You know all those earthquakes that happen throughout the game? That's simply the Fire Titan stirring in his prison. At this point though, this is where the castaway and Mendoza diverge in an extreme manner. Remember how I said that Mendoza is a good man on the far end of the spectrum? Well, he knows that releasing the Fire Titan will pretty much destroy this entire island along with all the people. We sort of got that clue in the opening movie where Mendoza pretty much left the crew to die before the ship crashed beneath the Water Titan's waves. He basically believes the end justifies the means. But for the castaway, the hero of the story, he wants to find another means to stop the Titan without spilling innocent lives. I actually thought you could side with Mendoza here at first, but that's not the case. Mendoza orders his men to kill the castaway, and off he goes into the Fire Titan's chambers. After defending himself against the Inquisition soldiers, the castaway talks to Ursagor again. Now that the Titan Lord is free, he's actually able to leave his throne. Long story short, because again, I'm lazy, Ursagor says that the castaway needs to find 5 pieces of the Titan armor in order to subdue the Fire Titan. And thus, Chapter 4 starts, which is basically traversing the entire island, which is easier now because at this point, you have a fair number of teleport stones at your disposal. The problem is that, much like the crystal discs, much like Steelbeard's 5 burial sites, you have to go to 5 separate ruins and obtain each piece of the Titan armor. The helmet, the hammer, the armor itself, which comes in 2 pieces, and the shield. And yes, I know the hammer is not literally an armor piece, but the quest is called Find All Pieces of the Titan Armor. Just so you know. I'll get into talking about Chapter 3 and 4 in a bit, but once you delve through all the remaining ruins, acquire all the pieces, the castaway has to go back to Eldric, the druid, who will restore the armor to its former glory. Then, the castaway journeys back into the Volcano Temple, talks to Ursagor, and faces off against Mendoza. Mendoza tells the castaway he won't be able to see the Fire Titan without the ocular he's wearing. So naturally, the castaway has to bring the almighty hammer on his head and take it off his corpse. The ocular, not the head. Then it's time for the final encounter, and this is where the game really, just look at this. Platforming, blocking projectiles to stun the boss, then attacking when he's stunned, then repeating while avoiding his AoE and fire beam attack, while also avoiding being dropped to your doom. It's not even me hating this section, but this was pretty confusing. I mean, the whole game you're fighting wildlife, dodging, blocking, impairing NPCs, using summons, maybe using some magical spell scrolls here and there. The game set expectations for you in its gameplay. I mean, there's pretty much no other boss in the game similar to this. So to have this be the final encounter feels like a tonal whiplash. I will say I get it though, not in the gameplay side of things, but the blinking platforms have runes on them. Piranha Bytes was trying to craft a final encounter to match its story significance. The runes are there to bind the Fire Titan in his prison. The platform's disappearing and reappearing because he's trying to break through. That's metaphorically cool. But when it comes down to the design, like I said, tonal whiplash. And to finish off this entire rant about the Fire Titan's gameplay design, your blows feel weightless whenever you smack him with the Titan Lord hammer. There's very little satisfying feedback whenever you attack him, like when you're fighting NPCs and wildlife. This may be by design, as the Titans are actually incorporeal. Mendoza and the caster are pretty much the only NPCs who can see and interact with Titans in this entire game. When the castaway defeats the Fire Titan though, you're treated to a pretty neat cutscene of the castaway delivering a final blow on the floor. Then some slithering thick tentacles drag the fiery Tarian back into its prison. So to break down each chapter and the whole game really, well, that is the whole game. Risen is very strong in its first two chapters, but the last two, like every Risen fan has been saying up to this point, isn't as good. The first two chapters are great. You're getting used to the gameplay, you're progressing your character, you join a faction, you're exploring the overworld. It's satisfying. The problem lies when chapter 3 starts and you go into chapter 4. Remember how in Gothic 1 and 2, and forgive me for constantly comparing Risen to those two games, you still had stuff to do in the camps and in Corinus, even in the later chapters. In Risen, once you're done in Dawn's camp and with the quest in Harbor Town, the rest of the game seems lacking in that department. No returning NPCs to go back to and talk to see how they're doing, see if they need any more new tasks to crop up. Like there's no quests that branch into other quests later into the game. Like I said, chapter 3 is just a big dungeon crawl. And that by itself is fine because the final chapter in Gothic 2 was like that. But therein lies the problem. Chapter 3 isn't the final chapter. It's fine if what it was leading up to was satisfying. It was a break from wandering the island and fighting wildlife and monsters and finding treasure and doing quests. It's what you come back to that's a little disappointing. You only make a brief stop to Port Harbor to either help the Dawn move back in, or help calm down Carlos with the Saurons who are attempting to take over Harbor Town. There's also an incident in the monastery as soon as chapter 3 starts where the Saurons somehow manage to assault the novices and mages. And that's great, but other than that, there's no quests that you did earlier that branch to more quests from any specific NPC. Like the devs didn't really make use of the Dawn's Camp or Port Harbor in the later chapters like they did in Gothic 2 with the Valley of Mines and Corinus. Chapter 4 is visiting the ruins for the Titan armor pieces, and the dungeon crawling in chapter 4 is fine by itself, but the problem is, that's nearly the entire chapter. It's one ruin after another, and they are actually fairly big. There's nothing to break up the monotony like in chapters 1 and 2. Then, it's off to the final boss, fight him, and finish the game. And the final boss himself, well, you're pretty much shoehorned to wearing the Titan armor and using the hammer against him. What if you're using swords the entire game? Or a staff? Or magic? I mean, it's nice that the Titan Lord hammer gives you +6 to your axe skill at least, but I didn't spend the entire game using a sword and shield just to switch to a hammer. It's even worse if you're playing a mage because you're spending all your game time training in rune and crystal magic while also learning basic training in staves. Then all of a sudden, you're dressed up like a cleric with a god-destroying hammer fighting like a professional warrior. It's such an odd gameplay design. If anything, you expect different kinds of Titan armor based on your class, like the developers accounted for what kind of skills you were using throughout the course of the game. I know in Gothic I, and spoilers for Gothic I real quick, space, okay, space, in that game, you're admittedly forced to use the magic armor and the two-handed sword Eritziel towards the end of the game, but at least in Gothic II, you're using the best armor and weapon for whatever faction you're a part of. Like I said, I like the story theme behind how the Fire Titan is imprisoned, that he's trying to break free and all that, but as a gameplay kind of thing, it's disappointing. At the end of the credits, Patty and the castaway talk to each other about the Titans and how the castaway is going to stop all of them with the power of the Titan armor and hammer. Very small little cliffhanger suggesting more Risen games will be released in the future, which I haven't played by the way, but I do want to after this. So to summarize, this was a solid game. There's a common consensus out there that Risen is not as good as the first two Gothic games, but fans do say it comes extremely close, and I pretty much agree. Like I said, the first two chapters are very strong, the last two, it kind of falls apart if you watch this entire video. But despite that, I'd be happy to play this game again in the future. I'd rather play this than anything coming out nowadays. In fact, at the time of writing this script, I'm already in the midst of a second playthrough after joining the Inquisition. And it's interesting to me experiencing the game again with a different perspective. You get to talk to Inquisitor Mendoza a bit more than you did than if you joined the Dawn's gang. When you arrive to the monastery, he tasks the castaway with solving a murder. And earlier in this video, it's interesting how you join the Inquisition in the first place. You either get forcibly conscripted, because wandering outside of town is illegal, or you willingly volunteer. If you do all the quests in Harbor Town for the Inquisition, Commandant Carlos will give you a letter of recommendation to get to Master Palace at the monastery, and doing this is the only way to become a mage. You may or may not be seeing footage of all this in particular, because I haven't really recorded my second playthrough. I was just playing it again for fun. And if the game holds my attention enough to where I want to play it again, then it's a safe thing to say that it's probably a good game. I rarely do back-to-back playthroughs. But now, I want to talk briefly about the world building, immersion, and atmosphere of Risen, as well as the music. To me, all these elements, including the combat and quest design, are marks of a good game. If I can interact with the environment, animation showcasing flipping a lever or pressing a switch or turning a winch, then it helps me feel further immersed in the game world. I feel like little things like this is just missing from some games, even back in the day. Not every game needs to have it, but a game like Risen or Gothic, I feel like it can add a lot to the experience. I believe I said this before, but Piranha Bytes has never really been good with its storytelling. I mean, in Gothic 2, the entire plot of the game is explained by Zardas in the beginning.
His last order was, "Come," and they came, all of them, even the dragons.
Dragons?
While the story in any of these games isn't terrible or anything, PEB has always been very good in its world design. You really do get a sense that you're a stranger on this weird island, the dangers around every corner, the traps in the ruins that test your awareness of your surroundings, the hidden wolves behind bushes. I never felt bored exploring nearly every inch of Faranga, even without the teleport stones in the early game. Things like, what's in that tower? Who's this NPC? Oh, that's an ash beast. I'm not strong enough for this thing yet, probably. I should leave before I die. And PEB was effective in getting you interested in exploring the game world. Like, take this NPC here for instance, Leon. Turns out he found a ring and decided to keep it for himself. Unlucky for him, he basically found a ring of power and has specters haunting his dreams, whispering deep, dark things in his ears. And he's been trying to stay awake as long as possible to avoid their whispers. Quest: go find all 6 of the Vassal Rings. They're located at ruined towers all across the island. One end over here, one end over there. The quest culminates with having to defeat the undead Lord Patrascon, and bringing all the rings together will break the curse on Leon. This quest alone will get you situated on this island, and the great thing about it is that it's more than interesting enough to make you want to complete it. It's also designed helpfully enough considering that Leon is pretty much near the center of the map. I really recommend doing this quest because you'll get the Conjurer's skeleton rune from Patrascon's corpse. Once you learn Create Scrolls, you'll be able to create scrolls from it. You need the specific rune in order to create a scroll with the Create Scrolls skill. Let's move on to voice acting. Piranha Bytes really upgraded their voice talent here compared to Gothic 1 and 2. While I find Gothic 1 and 2's voice acting charming as... Did I say charmy? Charming. Charming and funny. But not Risen. Risen is actually something else, the voice talent. If not for Lone Wanderer's comment, I would never have noticed. Piranha Bytes got some big names, even for the time, for their voice work. Lena Headey voices Patty, and some other female characters. John Rhys Davies voices Don Esteban, and Andy Serkis voices Inquisitor Mendoza. If you have no idea who any of these people are, Lena Headey is most famous for playing Cersei in the Game of Thrones TV series. She also played Mama in the 2012 version of Dread. John Rhys Davies played Gimli in Lord of the Rings. Andy Serkis did the voice and motion capture for Gollum in the same trilogy of movies. Carl Urban as Dread was also in Lord of the Rings as Éomer, though he wasn't in this game or anything, just wanted to bring that up. I'm not a big movie guy anymore, but this was a huge surprise to me. Lord of the Rings, the movies, came out while I was in high school. I actually had the pleasure of seeing the first 2 movies on the big screen in theaters, and Lord of the Rings came out a whole 5 to 8 years before Risen even released. So the fact that Piranha Bytes managed to get some big names for their 4th game is a huge step up. Even Lena Headey was kind of a big name a year before the game released as Sarah Connor in the TV series. 2 years after Risen, she'd be in Game of Thrones. But despite these big names, it doesn't take away from any of the voice talent for the other NPCs. Overall, the voice acting quality is such a huge step across the board compared to the earlier Gothic games. At the time, Piranha Bytes was really moving forward in many ways. Well, at least up to this point from what I read. Okay, lastly, the music. I was pretty happy to hear Kai Rosenkranz's score again. As we all probably know, Kai worked on the score for the first 2 Gothic games. Oh, and Gothic 3 too. I don't know why I didn't write that in. And while those 3 games had excellent music to draw you into its atmosphere, I feel like Risen is probably his best work. The first 2 Gothic scores reach about 20 minutes in length. Risen, over an hour. You can really hear reminiscence of Gothic notes in Risen here and there, while also being its own unique thing that draws you into its new separate world. Whereas the gameplay and world design from PB does remind you that you're in fact playing a Gothic-like game, Kai's bringing you back into it with notes similar to what you heard previously. I found the soundtrack so pleasant to listen to that, up to this point, I listened to the entire soundtrack outside of the game near a dozen times. It's very comfy. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Kai Rosenkranz worked on anything past Risen. At least, he didn't work on the next 2 Risen games, according to his wiki page here, which is quite the departure. I'm never going to play any of these games, but I'm curious to know if I'll hear his style in Leisure Suit Larry, Wet Dreams Don't Dry. The recent one. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time, and no, I haven't played any of them. One more thing to talk about before I end the video, but let's go back to the Gothic games real quick. You know how the Nameless Hero had friends, companions? Lester, Lee, Gorn, Milton, Diego? One thing that disappointed me about the Castaway is that he doesn't really make any friends in this game. I mean, there's Patty, but she's more of a love interest. It really feels like he's on his own here, maybe by design. I'm playing through the Inquisition path right now, so maybe some of these characters show up in the sequels. But even in Gothic 1, there was a sense of camaraderie even when the Nameless Hero first meets his soon-to-be lifelong friends. When I first met Yem, I thought was that he'd be kind of like a Diego. I would go back to him here and there to see if he had any new dialogue, but unfortunately he really only reacts whenever you get promoted to a new rank in the Dawn's faction. If you join the Inquisition or the Mages, he basically gives off an unfriendly stock line and doesn't want to talk to you anymore. Which makes sense, of course. He's basically there to guide you to the Dawn's camp or the Novice's farm and give Sarah a new place to stay if you tell him about her. No cool stuff with him or anywhere else, like hunting a black troll like the nameless hero did with Diego, or clearing enemies with gore on your way to that ruin the first Gothic game, or finding the deed to that castle with Lester from the swamp camp with all those harpies. All this right here is what I think is missing in Risen, a long-standing connection with companions. If you played all 3 Gothic games, then by the time you play Gothic 3, for better or worse, you really felt comfortable and connected with Lester and Diego and all those people. The nameless hero, and by extension you, the player, built a history with these characters since the first game. And that's why I felt Piranha Bytes really excelled in along with the atmosphere and immersion. The characters felt like characters. Not that the characters suck in Risen or anything like that, but more about the long-term interaction and branching quests and the like. Even in Gothic 1 alone, you got that with how much interaction you had with Lester and Gore and all that. In Risen, no such thing really, other than Peppermint Patty when it comes to a long-time companion. Every character I thought would stand out, well, once you're done doing their quest, they're basically in their spots at certain times of the day, and that's it for the rest of the game. And I guess you really don't need friends when you have Fred the Skeleton after all. I'm starting to think that maybe Castaway really named his skeleton companion Fred so he can assuage his loneliness at this point. So in conclusion, yeah, I like Risen, the good, classic Gothic-like. Piranha Bytes gameplay is similar to the first 2 games, with some improvements. Immersive atmosphere, engaging combat, mostly. Good music, and quest design. It's just lacking in the last 2 chapters. But despite that, I will come back and replay this game in the future, anytime. I mean, I'm replaying it right now, so the game is doing something right. So it definitely meets the Voidbrand Gallery replayability void stamp of approval. It's a solid game, and comes as near as you can to the first 2 Gothic games. So I'll end the video by saying if you haven't played Risen yet, and you're a Piranha Bytes fan of the first 2 Gothic games, then what are you doing? You should play it, right now, before operating systems evolve to the point that this game will become nearly unplayable.
Everything's going to hell, and I'm supposed to go hunting? No way! I'd rather sit here and have a little drink-a-dink-a-doo.